Everyone thinks Venezuela's oil is the prize. Flip the switch, pump the barrels, cash starts flowing. That story is wrong. Venezuela is not an oil gusher waiting to be opened. It is a rusted machine, broken by years of neglect, choked by politics, buried under debt. Yes, the oil is there, one of the largest reserves on earth. But oil underground is not wealth. Oil that cannot move is just geology. Right now, Venezuela produces less oil than it did 20 years ago. Less than 1% of global supply, and no raid, no decree, no headline can change the physics of decay overnight. This is not a story about quick wins. It's a story about time, about systems, about why damage lasts longer than power. If you want to understand what really happens next, stay with me. Because before oil flows, reality has to catch up. And to do that, we need to define the problem. Let's slow this down and make the problem precise. The question is not whether Venezuela has oil. It does. A lot of it, the real question is whether oil can be turned into production, and then into revenue, and then into stability. Right now, Venezuela produces around 800,000 barrels a day. Recently, it hovered near 1 million. That is a shadow of the past. 20 years ago, the country produced 3 million barrels a day. As recently as 2016, it was close to 2.5 million. What changed was not geology. It was management, sanctions, nationalization, and the slow collapse of institutions. There is also a misconception. People assume Venezuela could quickly replace major producers. It cannot. Its oil is heavy, difficult, and expensive to move and refine. So this is not a race to flip a switch. It is a long rebuild, measured in years and tens of billions of dollars. To understand why, we have to look backward at how this system broke in the first place. To understand the present, we have to rewind. Venezuela's oil collapse did not happen overnight. It followed a cycle, a familiar one. For decades, oil paid for everything. The state, subsidies, politics, and power. PDVSA became more than an oil company. It became a symbol of sovereignty, of national pride, but pride slowly replaced performance. Investment declined, maintenance was deferred, technical expertise left, and politics moved into the engine room. Then came nationalization. Contracts were rewritten. Foreign firms exited. Litigation replaced partnership. Sanctions later accelerated the damage. Capital dried up. Equipment imports stalled. Fields aged without care. This mattered because oil fields behave like living systems. Ignore them long enough, and they don't bounce back. They degrade. The result is what we see today. A country with vast reserves, but weakened capacity, and a system stuck in reverse. And then came the first shock, the moment when decline became undeniable. The first crisis wasn't loud. It was structural. Production didn't collapse in a single year. It slid quietly, relentlessly. Fields that once produced reliably began to fail. Pipelines corroded. Upgraders went offline. Small breakdowns piled into permanent losses. By the late 2010 seconds, Venezuela was producing barely a third of what it once did. Not because the oil disappeared, but because the system that moved it stopped working. This was the moment illusion broke. Oil wealth, it turned out, is not automatic. It has to be earned every day. Some believed sanctions alone caused the collapse. They didn't. The damage was already there. Sanctions only exposed it. At this point, even restoring existing fields required billions. 10, maybe 20. Just to stop the bleeding. This was no longer about growth. It was about survival. And as the system weakened, a deeper mechanism began to dominate the story. One that still controls Venezuela's future today. At the center of this story is a simple constraint. Venezuelan oil is hard. It is heavy. tar-like. It does not flow easily. It needs diluent just to move through pipelines. It is also sour, high sulfur, technically difficult, and always discounted. That means two things. First, production is expensive. Second, profit comes late. This is not shale oil. It does not deliver fast returns. It rewards patience and stability, but Venezuela has neither. Every barrel requires imports, lighter crude, equipment, spare parts, all paid in cash. Venezuela does not have. Then there is PDVSA, once powerful, now weakened, still politically untouchable, excluded, and you risk backlash. Rely on it alone, and production stalls. Foreign firms can help. They have capital, they have technology, but they will not invest blindly because oil lives longer than presidents. Returns come years later after governments change. This is the hidden mechanism. Oil wealth trapped by politics, physics, and time. And then pressure builds again toward a second breaking point. Pressure always reveals weakness. The second crisis is not underground. It is financial. To raise production, Venezuela needs cash. A lot of it, equipment, diluent, skilled labor, all imported, but Venezuela is broke. Its oil company cannot self-finance. The state has limited revenue, and every new barrel costs money before it earns any. Even optimistic plans require billions up front. 10 years, hundreds of billions, all before production reaches old levels. Then comes the trap. Debt. Venezuela owes more than it can pay. Bondholders, China, Russia. Past claims from nationalized assets. The numbers dwarf the economy. Debt larger than GDP. Interest unpaid for years. Any new oil revenue faces a choice. Rebuild the country or service old debts. Do both, and growth stalls. Choose one, and the other explodes politically. This is the second crisis, oil, that could revive the nation, but may instead be consumed by the past. And this is where the story stops being abstract, because this pressure lands somewhere very real on people. Now it reaches you, not markets, not governments, not oil companies. You, because when oil fails, life shrinks. Electricity becomes unreliable. Fuel shortages ripple outward. Transport slows. Prices rise quietly. Then suddenly you feel it in small ways. Longer lines, empty shelves, jobs that don't return, wages that lag behind reality. Oil revenue is supposed to fund schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Instead, it gets delayed, diverted, or swallowed by debt. And recovery does not feel like recovery. Not at first. Even 1 million barrels a day does not mean prosperity. Most of that oil is exported. Some is consumed at home. Very little turns into immediate relief. This is the hardest truth. National revival is slow, but daily life demands speed. If you're still listening, pause for a moment. Because the story isn't abstract. It's about expectations and what happens when they rise faster than reality. If you want to understand where this pressure goes next, stay with me. Because it doesn't stop at Venezuela's borders. It spreads outward. What happens in Venezuela never stays in Venezuela. Oil is global. Every barrel connects outward. A slow recovery means tight margins elsewhere. Refineries adjust. Shipping routes shift. Discounted, heavy crude changes, regional trade flows. For the United States, this oil matters. Not as abundance, but as fit. Gulf Coast refineries were built for this kind of crude. Heavy, sour, difficult. For other producers, Venezuela's return is not a shock. It is a creep, gradual, measured in years. That matters geopolitically, because oil is leverage, and slow leverage reshapes alliances quietly. China loses a repayment channel. Russia sees influence dilute. Debt negotiations realign power without a single announcement. This is not a dramatic realignment. It's structural drift. And beneath it all sits a deeper question. Who controls the future barrels? The state, foreign firms, or creditors? Because whoever answers that question shapes not just Venezuela's recovery, but the next decade of energy politics. And that brings us to the future. Not one outcome, but several. The future does not arrive as a single path. It branches. Scenario one is the optimistic case. Sanctions ease. Investment flows cautiously. Existing fields are repaired. Production rises to 1.5 million barrels a day over several years. Debt is restructured, not erased, but delayed. Stability improves slowly, not prosperity, but breathing room. Scenario two is the middle path. Oil output increases, but debt absorbs the gains. Creditors take priority. Public services lag. Politics turn tense again. Growth exists on paper, not in daily life. The system survives, but does not transform. Then there is the worst case. Unclear governance. Disputes over control. Legal fights over old claims. Capital stays away. Production stagnates near current levels. Oil becomes a symbol of betrayal, not recovery. None of these futures are decided by oil alone. They depend on institutions, on trust, on patience. Oil rewards systems that last. It punishes those that rush. And that is the final lesson Venezuela now faces. Because the end of this story is not about barrels. It's about choices. This is the uncomfortable truth. Venezuela's oil will not save it quickly. Not in one election cycle. Not in one presidency. Not with one bold announcement. Oil is not a miracle. It is a test of patience, of institutions, of whether a country can think beyond urgency. The wells will not gush on command. The debts will not disappear quietly. And the future will not wait for slogans to catch up with reality. But this moment still matters. Because done carefully, oil can stabilize. Done recklessly, it can repeat the collapse. So when you hear promises of instant revival, remember this. Real power is not controlling oil. It is controlling the system around it. If this analysis helped you see the story more clearly, stay with me. There is more to unpack, more systems to decode, more illusions to strip away. Because the most important stories today are not about what leaders say. They are about what time allows